Amen. Amen. All right, have a seat if you're standing. Today we're going to dive back into Moses. We're going to dive back into our series very cleverly entitled Moses Part 1 out of Egypt. If you missed last week, you can catch up on YouTube. Basically, what I wanted to establish last week is I wanted to set the setting. Of how we got from the end of Genesis, where Joseph and his family is thriving and second in charge of Egypt, to slavery, where everybody's enslaved. And so we looked primarily at Exodus chapter 1 through 14, and its correspondence to Egyptian history and archaeology. And we saw this great convergence between how the story of the Bible exactly matches what we see in the sand, what we see in archaeology, and what we see written in the preserved documents from that time. At the heart of our study is this great message that's going to just keep coming. God still saves. God still saves. He still rescues. He still saves. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Last week, we talked in very general terms about God rescuing people out of darkness and into light, moving from darkness into light. Today, we're going to be a little bit more niche as we talk about God's rescue. And we're going to be focusing on the birth of Moses and his earliest years. And what I want to communicate today when it comes to God as the rescuer is this. God still rescues us from whatever our upbringings might have been and their impact. God still rescues us from whatever our upbringings might have been into his most significant, good, and impact-filled positive future if we trust him, follow him, and courageously obey his leading and commands. That's ultimately what we're talking about today. That God still rescues us from whatever our upbringings, whatever they might have been, into his most significant, good, and impact-filled futures if we trust him by following and courageously obeying his leading and his commands. I guess a more simple way to say that is, whatever your past, God has a good plan for your future. And he has a great plan on how to get you there from whatever your past. Okay, look, you didn't have much of a say at all. In fact, you had no say in what your upbringing was like, what your experience was in your upbringing, especially in those earliest of years. But you didn't know, I guess, like how many different parental beings were going to be part of your life, how many parental types were going to be in your life. You didn't have any say of whether you were going to be treated by your parental beings in good ways or in evil ways or a mixture of both. You had no say in what your financial opportunities or advantages or disadvantages might have been in your upbringing growing up. You didn't have any say in the spiritual realities in your home when you were young, what you were born into, and whether the advantages or disadvantages in that. You had very little say. You had no say in your upbringing, especially in your earliest of years. But here's three very powerful premises when it comes to your upbringing years. First of all, God knew you before you were even born. He knew you before the foundation of the world. He knew your story. He knew you. Secondly, God knew exactly what advantages you were going to experience and evils. God knew what advantages you were going to live through and what evils you were going to experience growing up. Thirdly, although the evil was not God's ideal for your life, he knew it was going to be your path, and he has always had a plan. God has always had a plan to take you from your pain-filled past into your powerful future. He has always had a plan to take you from your pain-filled past. Whatever it was, however much evil there was, he's always had the plan to take you from that pain-filled past to your powerful future in Jesus. He's had the plan to lead you through the healings of your hurts into your ideal and significant future. If you will just trust him and walk the path that he set for you, he's got this perfect plan. He's got this perfect plan to get you from here to there. Now, that plan is going to include forgiving. It's going to include forgiving everyone of every evil that was done to you, which can be a very hard thing to do, but it's also a very life-changingly powerful thing to do, a good thing to do. It is the most heart-healing thing that you can do, and we can fight it, we can resist it, but it is life-transforming, powerful, and the God who knew the pains of your past also put down in writing how to heal from them and how to get from brokenness into healing and powerful in Jesus' kingdom and his future for you. But again, you're going to have to trust him, and you're going to have to follow him through that path in order to get there. If you think about Moses, he did not have the ideal upbringing. And I think that maybe when I read this story, I think, oh man, he had it all. He grew up in an affluent, rich home with the best education in the world. So he must have had a great upbringing, right? Okay, wait, but actually, is that really how it works? The people who are raised in super rich homes with great education, are they really having the best upbringings? Is that what we know to be true? No. What about things like love? What about things like good home environment and things like that? Remember, Moses was not raised in a godly family. He wasn't able to be raised in his birth home, in his godly birth home. Instead, he was raised in a highly pagan home. He was raised in an extremely power-hungry home. You know, the Pharaoh's home in Egypt, a very money-obsessed, power-obsessed home. He was raised in an extremely racist home, specifically racist against his gender and ethnicity combination. Right. And at his age group, like he is living with all these evils in his home of his upbringing. We talked about this last week, but the Egyptians hated and dreaded these Jewish kids, and they were putting them to death. The boys specifically. And Moses' skin color is going to be more yellow than the rest of his household. He's going to be in this adopted family with this wrong gender, wrong skin color, and the one that actually the head of the household was ordering the murders of those types of people. Okay? Sure. They had money, and sure, he had a great education. But really, is he living in this ideal home situation? His stepfather and his step-grandfather are the ones who are commanding that the Moseses are to be killed. He's got the hated gender race combo in even his own home. So is that how you would want your children to be raised? If you couldn't raise them yourself, is that how you want them to be raised? Probably not. Last week I started this study from, we read the Bible, and then we looked at the Egyptian side of like what was going on in the Egyptian story of this Exodus and this setting up period. This week, I want to start more with a little bit more of the Egyptian side to begin with, and then see how that flows into and sets up the Bible story, specifically connected to the birth and the adoption of Moses. Okay? So that's kind of where I want to go for this next bit. The person's name that you want to just kind of file away, here's the source material, the ancient source material for what I'm talking about. The guy's name is Artapanus. And I did mention him last week, but Artapanus is a big deal. Artapanus is a Jewish historian of Persian background, living in Alexandria, Egypt. Okay? He's the Jewish historian living in Alexandria, Egypt, of Persian origin, and he's living there around just 300-ish BC, a little bit before that, a little bit after that. Okay, this guy's a big deal. He is commissioned by the Ptolemy leadership of Egypt. Okay, what's going on there? Alexander the Great dies in 323 BC in Babylon. His generals divide up the kingdom and take different bits. The Ptolemies take Egypt and that era. That's around 323, right at this point. The Ptolemies show up in Egypt, and they want to figure out, kind of catch up what's going on. And so they commission, there's Jewish people, a lot of Jewish people in Egypt. Why? Jeremiah. Remember Jeremiah and all that story? Those guys, they get afraid of Babylon. They move to Egypt. They never move back. There's been lots of Jewish people in Egypt from that time. So the Ptolemies want to hear the story. What's going on with all these Jewish people in Egypt? And so they commission Artapanus to write in Greek, in the Greek language, their language, a history of the Jews in Egypt. And so he has all the access to the documents of that famous great library in Alexandria, Egypt. And so he does that. And as this Persian background person, he writes this story. Now, sadly, his original manuscript did not survive the Great Fire of Alexandria, which also destroyed the famous library. But fragments of it continued to exist in quotations in different books, and even summaries of his works were in different books preserved through the ages. For example, some of the church fathers have big excerpts of his writings in them, like Clement of Alexandria in his book Stromata. He's got big excerpts in there. Eusebius of Caesarea in his book Evangelicae Preparonis. I practiced that better. It sounded better when I practiced that. They've got lots of quotes in there. But one of the fragments that has been preserved tells us about Moses' step-grandfather. And it says, and the story is, according to Artapanus, that there was this pharaoh who in his Greek name was Palmentholes, which I'm not going to say again. That's his Greek name. His Egyptian name is Pengenu. And that's what we'll talk about as Pengenu. Now, again, we talked about this last week. Of course, people have different names in different languages. That's not weird. Esther, Hadassah. We see it all through the Bible in different cultures, different languages. Also, we do the same thing, and we don't think about it, but like Jesus, nobody called Jesus Jesus. They called him Jesus, right? So, but we call him Jesus, and we think that's who it was. No, we've changed the pronunciation of names, same sort of thing. So Palmentholes, his Egyptian name being Pengenu, he writes that it was his daughter, Princess Meris, whose Egyptian name is Merit, and we'll refer to her as Merit, Meryt, who drew baby Moses out of the Nile and adopted him. And Josephus also says the same thing. Josephus gives us the same story here. And what we learn from Artapanus' preserved writings is that the country at that time was divided into two. We talked last week about this strong set of new pharaohs coming out of Luxor down south in Egypt. There was a little hanging on of a little small group in the north, led out of Avaris, where Pengenu is still kind of the pharaoh of the north, but his power is mostly gone by this point, and he's the last one here. And so he's got a little bit of power up in the north, but he's functioning as more of a puppet king to the mighty kings to the south. And it's while Pengenu is ruler of the north, no doubt with great pressure from the mighty kings of the south, that the decree was issued that all the baby boys are to be killed. All the baby Jewish boys are to be killed. And again, this is Merit's father, right? This is Merit's father issuing the decree for this to be done. And it's also being issued by either, depending on exactly when the decree was issued, either Merit's future husband or Merit's future husband's brother, depending on when it started. But all of these men who are going to have a massive impact in Merit's life are the ones issuing the decree throughout the nation that all the Jewish baby boys are to be killed. Okay, so Artapanus also tells us that the pharaoh who ruled in the south down there at the time Pengenu ruled the delta was called Khenepheres. That's his Greek name, or Khenephere. Now here's a statue of him in the Louvre in Paris. You can go visit it, but not now without quarantine. So you've got Khenephere here, and he is the one who marries Merit, the princess of the north, and it's their marriage that unites all of the kingdom again. Okay, and so Khenephere then becomes Moses's adopted stepfather. Yeah. It's very easy to identify this guy in Egyptian's history, Khenephere, because there's no other king in all of Egyptian history with the same name. So it's very easy to identify him. Marrying Merit, again, unified the kingdom. The renowned American Egyptologist James Henry Breasted regarded Khenephere as the most powerful pharaoh of the 13th dynasty. Why? Lots of statues everywhere. Here's some more statues. This is in Luxor. If you want to know if you're a powerful king, just statues. I guess that's the secret. They find statues of this guy even in Sudan. Like a huge scope of power that this guy had. Lots of them. We don't actually know how long his reign lasted because I think I showed you last week the Turin, the Royal Canon of Turin document. It was pretty beat up, lots of missing pieces. That bit is missing on how long his reign lasted, but we assume it's several decades just because of how many statues and the scope of all of the ruins connected to him. So that's a double statue of him. Why have one when you can have two, right? In Luxor. Okay, now just to clarify a bit, we're about to get to the Bible here, but just to clarify a bit, Moses was adopted by merit before she was married. Before she was married. So she was still just the oldest daughter of the Pharaoh of the North, and it wasn't until Moses was about 10 years old that she was married to Kenephere. And then from then on, Moses was raised as the oldest, albeit adopted, son of Kenephere, the only Pharaoh of the reunited Egypt. Now, in the years leading up to Kenephere's marriage, while Penjenu is still king, we can see that in Avaris, what's happened is the largest dwellings that were historically occupied by the clan chiefs of each of the tribes of Israel, they had been emptied out of the clan leadership, and then Egyptian overlords were put into those, Egyptian chieftains were put over those, and the expanding Jewish population and leadership was shoved out of that area, and they were put in overcrowded squalor to the east of the palace settlement. There's a map here on the screen. The population was so densely packed that even they had to do their burials even under the floorboards of their own houses. Okay, very densely packed. So you can see on the map here in kind of the lower right, you have Joseph's palace, his palace ruins. That was also Jacob's palace location. Around that location would have been where all of his brothers' main houses would have been, which would become the clan chiefs. Well, that area got cleared out, and they would have been pushed off over to the side. And you can see I put a red X around that area where they were kind of rehoused into. Okay, so Moses' parents would have been raised, or Moses' parents, he would have been born in that area or just north. There's kind of an island-looking thing, and it has this 12th century palace. That 12th century palace is where Meres lives and where the Pharaoh lives at that time, even though we're in the third dynasty here. They've got the palace there. And you would have had Moses being born on the east side of that area there, okay? So that's where he would have been when born. Now, I'm going to say more about Egypt in a little bit, but now I want to read the Bible and the Bible's version of events before we go on any further. We're going to, now that we have a little bit of background here, and I'm going to start with where we left off last week in Exodus chapter 1, starting in verse 15, okay? This is what we read. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, the first, whose name was Shiphrah, and the second, whose name was Puah, when you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. If the child is a son, kill him, but if it's a daughter, she may live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this and let the boys live? The midwife said to Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get to them. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very numerous. Since the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Okay, so although we're not talking about Moses yet, I want to make some quick comments about these amazing women of faith. These amazing godly women, Shiphrah and Puah. These verses could have been left out of the story. You realize that, right? They could have been left out of the story, but these women were such a big deal to Moses and to God that he wanted them to be lifted up and exalted by their exemplary faith and bold courage when it came to looking to God. They're heroes. They're heroes who didn't care about their lives as much as God's ways. These women have put their lives on the line, defying the command of Penjenu, the Pharaoh there, because they knew that his command was evil, and they were not going to compromise for the sake of their jobs. They were not going to compromise for the sake of their lives. And Moses and God lift these women up as examples of living a God-pleasing life, no matter the pressures, no matter the pain. So they disobey and they lie about it, and God blesses them. Now, this is a bit complicated theologically. God seems to bless them for disobeying and lying. All I want to say is lying is a sin, and that's pretty clear throughout the Bible. So be very careful how you apply this story in your own context and your own situations. Don't be eager to apply this. There is a good chance that if you try and apply this, that you will get this one wrong. But these women are still remembered and praised for their bold trusting of God, no matter the pressures, no matter the potential cost. And I just wanted to highlight that like Moses does here. And then we read verse 22. So basically, the order has gone out, but the babies are not being killed. It's not happening. But then we get to verse 22. Pharaoh then commanded all his people, all his people, you must throw every son born to the Hebrews into the Nile, but let every daughter live. So there's a shifting now. It's no longer up to the Hebrew midwives, but now it's his people who are being commanded to do this. Let me show you a couple of charts. Okay, all over Avaris, they've found all these tiny graves of the grave victims connected to this massacre here of this time. They've been unearthed by the Austrian excavators who have been doing this work for quite a long time. The normal grave population for infants in settlements like this is around 25%. 25%. But in Avaris here, at this moment, the figure reaches an astonishing 65%. Now do the maths. If it's normally 25%, but half of those are women, 12.5%. And then if your normal birth rate is something like half boys, half girls, and all of the boys are killed, plus that other baby, I mean, does that get us pretty close to 65% when you have 12.5% girls who are going to naturally not make it anyways? You add the 50% of all the guys plus 12.5, you're getting to like 62.5%. You're right around that exact mark. And this is looking just at the ground in the infant graves at this massacre moment. And so we also know that they're the baby boys because and again, this is a little bit of an inexact science, but you can see that the adult graves over time, that there is way more women that are reaching adulthood than men. And it becomes a 5-to-3 ratio there, but that's not exactly. We don't know how long the baby massacre took place, how big of a window that is, but still, you see a big swing in population, men to women. The archaeological evidence just so backs up what we see in Avaris. So backs up exactly what we're reading here in the Bible during this time. That's free. Let's keep reading. Let's keep reading and turning into Exodus chapter 2 with this story. Now, a man from the family of a Levi, I'm going to read that again. Now, a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. We know their names. Exodus chapter 6, verse 20. Exodus 6, verse 20, their names are Amram, that's his name, pretty cool name, Amram, and Jochebed. Amram and Jochebed. So that's his parents' names. Verse 2, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful or good, she hid him for 3 months. Now, again, that makes sense. The evil that's going on, right? The trauma of what's going on here. Verse 3, but when she could no longer hide him, now we know that it couldn't have been going on for much longer because Moses has an older brother, right? So Moses' older brother Aaron is fine, and so this decree is relatively recent-ish within the last. I think wasn't Aaron like 6 years older? Is that right? I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. Anyways, everybody's like, okay. So, but when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Then his sister stood at a distance in order to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe at the Nile, while her servant girls walked along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, sent her slave girl, took it, opened it, and saw him, the child. And there he was, a little boy, crying. She felt sorry for him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." A map. Back to the map. Okay, so the arrow on the map is showing the river flow from the area where Moses and Moses' family would have been. That's the direction of the river flow, right towards the 12th century palace there, right? Right towards the 12th dynasty royal palace. Dynasty, yeah, that's more accurate. 12th dynasty royal palace. Okay, so you got Moses being put in the ark, and in this case, made out of papyrus ark, same word as Noah's ark, right? But that idea, that boat, and then it's been set afloat on the, I don't know how to pronounce that, Pelusiac Nile, that thing, and it's flowing that direction. Probably put in the Nile somewhere around where this next picture is. Kind of put in, here's the bank of that, in that area where and kind of put in there to kind of float along that general direction. Short distance floating along. Miriam is watching the basket, and it drifts into the royal bathing area where Merit, the eldest daughter of King Gentu, was relaxing. Look, here's a recreation of that area with the palace here, kind of floating into the reeds, maybe here by the palace here. Reconstruction. So even though the Bible is clear that Merit knew what was going on here, she knew that this was a Hebrew baby, she knew what was going on, and she, even though she's maybe distantly genetically connected to the Jewish people, she decides to adopt the baby boy. Now, hear this. Merit, she may have been the only person in all of Egypt who could have gotten away with directly defying her father's orders to kill all the Hebrew baby boys. I'm just going to say that again. She may have been the only person in all of Egypt who could have gotten away with directly defying her father's orders to all the Egyptians to kill all the Hebrew baby boys. I mean, it's like one of those like dads and daughters things, right? Dads and daughters. The daughters, they can get away with anything. Anyways, now, just think about how clearly and yet invisibly God's hand is at work here. There is no obvious miracle here other than God's hidden hand of providence. You see God's guidance, but it doesn't say God led the boat to this place. You only see it based on the circumstances. But God is clearly at work in this moment. And you know what? God has clearly been at work in your lives as well. God has clearly been at work in your lives. Can you see it? Can you see God's hand in your life? We've been trained not to recognize God's hidden hand at work in our lives through providence and through just the way circumstances worked out. We've been trained that if there's any other possibility or any other explanation, then it's probably not God. It's probably luck. It's easier to blame luck than God. And we've been trained not to identify God's hidden hand guiding our lives. God is more at work in your life and in your situation than you even perceive. God is way more at work in your life and in your situation than you even perceive. But back to Moses here. Look at God's hidden hand in these verses. The basket just so happens to drift into the royal bathing area, which should have been a death sentence to Moses. Because every Egyptian has been commanded to kill the babies. It wasn't able to float on past like you would have hoped and go out to some to some other area. It just so happened that the basket was there at the exact moment in time when the princess Merit, maybe the only person in all of Egypt who could defy her father's commands, was there. Not only does Merit find him, but she has a positive emotional response to the baby boy. And you just cannot underestimate the response, the heart responses, and God's work of giving compassion to people or sympathy to people or giving you favor in people's eyes, these subtle ways that God guides and nudges. And maybe you think that God is very rarely active in your life. I would say you're probably just blinded to it. God is so microsecond active in our world today, and he can be so subtle that if you're not paying attention, or even if you are paying attention, it can be easy to miss. God is better to you than you realize. God has been so much better to you than you realize, and he's been helping you more frequently than you notice. We're going to truth talk for a second, and we're going to truth type online. We're going to do something here. The thing that we're going to be truth typing is, God is better to me than I realize. And online, you're going to be like, yes, God is better to me than I realize. In this room, we're going to truth talk, and we are going to say with passion, I can only see your eyes, and that's not all super encouraging because you guys are thinking, and it looks more like, Urgh. So you're gonna amuse me with your eyes as you speak out this truth joyfully, and you're gonna be like, God is better to me than I realized. Like, you're just gonna preach it to me, and we're gonna do this, and you're talking a light, all right? In fact, it requires a one-hand gesture. Like, all right, ready? 3, 2, 1. God is better to me. Realize, yeah, that was not good. Okay, let's just, I know we're masked, and you don't know if I'm talking or not. Can you tell me? Okay, we're going to try this again, and we're just going to preach it, all right? I got to at least be, somewhat moved in the good way. All right, 3, 2, 1, here we go. God is better. Yes, Catherine, thank you. Yeah, that was good. That was a lot better. Truth talking. We're going to do another one, though. We're going to do another one. God is better to me than I realized, and we're also going to truth type or truth talk. God is helping me more frequently than I notice. Good luck on spelling frequently online. Frequently. God helps me more frequently than I notice. God helps me more frequently than I notice. Ready for that here? Ready to bring it? All right. 3, 2, 1. God helps me more frequently than I notice. Okay, I helped you out too much on that one. I got too excited. All right. Okay, let's try this again in the room. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Yeah, that's adequate. That's a passing grade. Okay, so good. I'm glad that we're deeply convicted by that. We've owned that one by the level of passion that I can sense in the room. All right, so but God is very active in our lives, more than we realize. And we see that here with God's hidden hand in this story. But let's keep reading in verse 7. Then his sister, Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, should I go call a Hebrew woman who is nursing to nurse the boy for you? Go, Pharaoh's daughter told her. So the girl went and called the boy's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages. So the woman took the boy and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she became her son. She named him Moses because, she said, I drew him out of the water. In English, we read Moses. Hebrew word, his actual name would be Moshe. Right? Egyptian, Mio, like the cat sound. Mio. All right? And now here's a solid maybe for you. Here's a picture on the screen. Now, I do not read fluently Egyptian hieroglyphics, meaning I don't read them at all. So this may not be the exact hieroglyphic. As far as I can tell, it is, but it may not be the exact hieroglyphic. There's so many in this area, and I sifted and I sorted and I looked through all these as much as possible. But Professor Kim Ryholt, in his major work on this time period, believes that Sebekatep Mio is the Prince Sebekatep on this stela, carved in the Wadi Hamamat here. What you have on this stela, or the right one, if I don't have it right, is Kanefere, whose full name is Sebekatep IV Kanefere. And his first and oldest son, Prince Sebekatep Mio, on this thing. His oldest son, Moses, Kanefere and Moses. Moses being adopted about 10 years before Merritt married Kennefery would definitely mean that Moses is the clear oldest of Kennefery's four four known sons. Now, according again to the Royal Canon of Turin, which is in bad shape, we know though that Mio does not follow Kennefery in succession. It's a different guy who follows him, a guy named Merhotepre Sebekatep V. Something happened to Prince Sebekatep Mio between the carving of this and when Kennefery dies. What happened? I wonder. Murder. I don't know. I digress. Anyway, so there's something going on there. So in these verses, again, we see the hidden hand of God, allowing Moses' mother, Jochebed, to transition from this desperation, this fear, this awfulness, the end of the line. She makes a basket for her baby, sticks baby Moses off in the river, and just to see what's going to happen, to see God intervene, and then she gets to be the one that raises her own son, provided for, paid for by the princess, and under the protection of the princess. And you're like, wow, what a story. What an amazing story. And the only thing that the Bible explicitly says that God did, blessed the Hebrew midwives. That's the only thing that God is specifically attributed to God. All the rest of it is just seeing God's clear, obvious, hidden hand at work. It's unstated, but it's clearly true of God's work of intentionally rescuing Moses from almost certain death at age 3 months. Again, can you see God's hand in your story? Can you see God's hand in your story, in your upbringing? And sure, there are those who are raised in wonderful Christian homes who know nothing of poverty and nothing of abuse or anything like that. But there are many more who have experienced in the spectrum of possible evils, evil in their growing up years. Horrific things traumatic things in their growing up years. And if your story has some of that evil, if your story has some of that awfulness, sometimes we can get transfixed by the pain and stuck because of the pain that we have gone through in the growing up years. But I want you to know that God was there. That God was there, whether you knew him or not, he knew you. He's had his eyes on you from before you were born. God was with you when you were young. God was with you in that moment of pain and awful, maybe the abuse, the trauma. There is not a horrific moment of your life that God has not been there with you in it all. God was there. In fact, truth type that, and we'll truth talk that. God was there. Go ahead and type that. God was there. God was there. In this room, 3, 2, 1. Go. Yeah, God was there. God was there. You know what? God even spared you from things you don't even know about. He may have spared you from dying a couple times. You have no idea. He may have just spared you from worse. You have no idea what he even able to spare you of in those growing up years. And if your story is full of awful and horrific and evil stuff, God was there. He was paying attention. And I know that he intervened in your life at several hidden moments. Although he didn't spare you maybe of experiencing evil, even horrific evil, he's always had a plan to heal you. He may not have spared you, but God has always had a plan to heal you of every bit of it and lead you into your significant future. Moses, raised in a home with all that racial hatred, specifically connected to his gender and his race, raised in a home worshiping demons, the demons of Egypt with all their awful practices. But God takes Moses from this not ideal upbringing and will use him in an incredible way. And no matter your story, I know that God can do the same with you. God has a path for you to go from there to your future. And what is that path? First, you give your life to Jesus. You surrender your life to obeying him and to walk in his way. It is the path of healing for your heart, of rescue for your heart and your life. Secondly, you're going to go out the path of forgiving everyone of everything. Thirdly, you're going to invite the Holy Spirit to come and to lead you and to keep coming and bringing healing to your heart wound and guidance to your life. Fourthly, you're going to be committing your future to following the leading of God. Those first three are God's path of healing you from your path. But the fourth one is about God leading you into his future for you as you walk in his ways, as you surrender to his directions, like forgiving people and seeing God heal your heart. And can you see God's hand in your story? He's there. He's all over your story. And now Jesus has a good plan for your pain and an even better plan for your future. The challenge for you this week is this. I want you to identify the people from your growing up years that you need to forgive or to forgive again, and then work through the process of forgiving them all with Jesus in prayer. With Jesus in prayer. In fact, I'm going to invite up Ruth right now to help us with this moment and to maybe walk us through a moment of pausing and seeing, working us through the forgiven process of people in our lives.